Hello from Jerusalem, a divided city that's been under Israeli occupation since the Six-Day War in 1967. It's been 50 years that Palestinians have been living under occupation. But for thousands of years before that, it has and still continues today to be sacred for the three monotheistic religions. So why is a place so important to Muslims, Christians, and Jews such a big source of contention? Is it a battle between religions? Or is it the illegal expansion of a state? In this show, we'll be looking at the issue of the Israeli settlements, as well as the once bitter two Palestinian factions. But first, TRT World's Middle East correspondent, Yola Abdavid, starts us off with what's changed since 1967 and the recent announcement by U.S. President Donald Trump.
Jerusalem is a city that is sacred in three faiths. East Jerusalem, like other occupied areas, is a place to control Palestinians through overzealous policing. Now, Israel is a state that is synonymous to many as a place where there are aggressive settlers, a well-armed army and border police, and a place where people feel they are being oppressed by an unsympathetic regime. And yet, this prides itself on being a state which is a democracy, and yet controls Palestinians by permits, specialized measures, and sometimes by house demolitions. Now, this is the 50th anniversary of the military takeover after the 1967 war. The occupation has an effect on most Palestinians, socially, economically, politically, militarily, and psychologically. In Qalqilia, in the town of Qalqilia in June, I saw thousands of workmen coming back through the steel gates in the separation barrier, the security wall, as the Israelis like to call it. These men were tired after spending 12, 15 hours painting, renovating, decorating houses in Israel for Israeli people. In Gaza, there is a blockade that has an impact, a huge impact, on over 1 million people. The suicide rate is increasing because of the desperation some people feel. And then, in December, we had the US president deciding to change the US policy by declaring that the US embassy would move from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. They would recognize a divided city as being a place where Israel could call its capital. And by that, it destroys the pretense that America could be an honest broker in peace negotiations and that America is neutral. This undermines the Palestinian goal of calling Al-Quds here in East Jerusalem as being their capital in a future Palestinian state. While Israeli politics veers more and more towards the right wing, Palestinians who are not members of Fatah or Hamas are tired. They are fed up of corruption and nepotism, fatigued after decades of conflict. Now, some activists say there's a need for a new grassroots movement, away from the grey-haired old men who cling on to power but don't stage free and fair elections. So could Trump's decision on Jerusalem be a benefit rather than an insult to Palestinians? Could there be a new approach to break the deadlock in future Israeli-Palestinian peace negotiations?
On December 6th, U.S. President Donald Trump broke from decades of U.S. foreign policy. Washington had resisted recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital before the Israeli-Palestinian conflict was resolved. But no more. Trump's unilateral announcement set into motion what looked like the end of a two-state solution. The United States and Israel, the strongest of allies in a tumultuous region. Yet, for the past 2 decades, Washington has refrained from lending support to one of Israel's oldest desires. In 1995, Congress passed a law to ready the United States to move its embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. But every U.S. president since Bill Clinton has signed a national security waiver every 6 months, keeping it in Tel Aviv, including Donald Trump when he signed it back in June. But that all changed at the beginning of December when Trump abruptly decided to break from decades of U.S. foreign policy.
Therefore, I have determined that it is time to officially recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel.
The announcement sent shockwaves across the world. All Arab and Muslim majority countries immediately rejected the decision. Most European countries condemned it, as did the European Union. So, was it a fresh approach to a stagnant Middle East peace process? Or was it targeted to fulfill a campaign promise towards his evangelical conservative base and to keep his powerful pro-Israel donors happy? One thing is certain, and that is Trump's announcement was warmly received by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
This decision reflects the president's commitment to an ancient but enduring truth, to fulfilling his promises, and to advancing peace. The president's decision is an important step towards peace.
But that was not how the Palestinian side saw it. Mahmoud Abbas lashed out and said not only was this the end of a two-state solution, but also questioned the future role of the United States as a peace broker.
What has happened and the way that the United States acted specifically took them out of the role of being a broker for peace.
The tension on the streets quickly rose to boiling point. Palestinian protesters clashed with Israeli security forces in the occupied West Bank. More than a dozen were killed, with hundreds more injured. Protests were staged in cities around the world. Jakarta, Beirut, Istanbul, all denounced the decision by the U.S. The anger on the streets, not only here in Jerusalem, but also across the entire Muslim and Arab world, prompted leaders into action. First, Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan called an emergency session of the 57-member Organization for Islamic Cooperation. The leaders of the Muslim world gathered in Istanbul. They were looking to send a strong message to the U.S. and Israel. Much more than just a condemnation.
I would like to call upon the nations of the globe who respect international law to recognize Jerusalem as the occupied capital of the state of Palestine. We cannot delay it anymore.
But this was just the beginning. The next platform was the United Nations. Egypt presented a resolution to the Security Council calling it to reject Israel's claim over Jerusalem and reiterate the Council's view that no country should establish an embassy in Jerusalem before the conflict was resolved. Even America's staunchest allies on the 15-member Council voted in favor of the resolution, increasing America's international isolation. But America's veto prevented the resolution from passing. And just when the momentum seemed to be stalling, in a rare motion, Turkey and Yemen demanded an emergency special session of the entire 193-member General Assembly. The U.S.'s patience was running thin, and it resorted to threats.
The United States will remember this day in which it was singled out for attack in the General Assembly for the very act of exercising our right as a sovereign nation. We will remember it when we are called upon to once again make the world's largest contribution to the United Nations.
But at the end, the United Nations voted overwhelmingly to condemn President Donald Trump's decision to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel.
In favor, 128. Against, 9. Abstentions, 35.
And while this decision is non-binding, it does give hope to the Palestinians to continue with their push for recognition and an end to the occupation. In October, a reconciliation agreement was announced between Fatah and Hamas. It raised hopes that a decade of bitter feuding between the rival Palestinian factions may finally come to an end. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas called it a declaration of the end to division, while an Hamas spokesperson said it was a new chapter in Palestinian history. Here's a closer look at how the two Palestinian factions fell out and the steps taken towards ending the rift. Israeli settlements have long been one of the issues that prevented Israelis and Palestinians from reaching a peace deal. Around 400,000 Israelis live in 132 settlements and dozens of outposts in the occupied West Bank, and 200,000 Israelis live in East Jerusalem. The settlements are illegal under international law. They're built on land Israel occupied in the 1967 Six-Day War. Since Donald Trump became U.S. president nearly a year ago, Israel has approved thousands of new homes as additions to existing settlements, and there are plans to build new settlements. 2017 marked the 50th year of Israeli occupation of East Jerusalem. Not much has changed in the last half-century. Some would even argue that it's gotten worse. But for a city that dates back thousands of years, this year's events will only be a page from its history and possibly a step forward to reach its ultimate goal of sustainable peace. That's it from us here in Jerusalem. Thanks for watching.